Welcome to the PDPM Quality and Value Has to Succeed in 2019 and Beyond conference call. My name is Jenny and I'll be your operator for today's call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. During the question-and-answer session, if you have a question, please press star then 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please note that this conference is being recorded. I will now turn the call over to Lori Hintz. You may begin.
Hi, everybody. As Jennifer said, my name is Lori Hintz, and I welcome you today. I am the Nursing Home Quality Improvement Advisor for Great Plains Quinn, South Dakota. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Great Plains Quality Innovation Network, which is the Quinn QIO serving Kansas, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And also bringing this education today is our partners, our colleague Quinn QIO, serving the great states of Alaska, Colorado, Hawaii, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Oregon, Utah, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. We have a lot of friends. Our mission is to achieve the aims of better health care, improved health, safer care, and lower health care costs. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items to review. If you have not received access to the presentation handouts through your Quinn QIO, you can access it via the link that Crystal placed in the chat box. Today's webinar is being recorded and will typically be posted within 10 business days on our website, www.greatplainsquinn.org. We'll put that link in the chat box, or it will be on your state's Quinn QIO website. All lines will be muted throughout the presentation, and if time permits, hopefully, we will be able to open lines after Maureen's presentation. The chat box is located on the bottom right side of the screen. Please feel free to post questions, and they will be addressed at the end of today's presentation. Thank you to Crystal Hayes of Nebraska in monitoring the chat function for this event. Today's webinar has been approved for 1.5 education hours for nursing home administrators through the South Dakota Nursing Home Administrators Board. Upon completion of the event evaluation, there will be a link to print off an attendance certificate for your records. Within that certificate, the verbiage will contain the Nursing Home Administrator CEU information. You can save it and/or print the certificate from your computer. The recently finalized patient-driven payment model, along with the quality reporting program and value-based purchasing program, will have significant impact on long-term care ratings for 2019 and beyond. Comprehending the major fundamentals of these key evaluation metrics will be imperative to safeguard success in the future. With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Maureen McCarthy. Maureen is the president of Celtic Consulting and the CEO and founder of Care Transition, a post-discharge care management service provider. Recognized as an industry leader in clinical reimbursement for long-term care, she has been a registered nurse for over 30 years, with experience as an MDS coordinator, director of nursing, rehab director, and a Medicare biller. Adding to her numerous recognitions and leadership roles, Maureen was recently presented the American Healthcare Association 2018 Education Award and has been selected to join the American Healthcare Association's PDPM Academy training team. Maureen is certified in the Resident Assessment Process, QAPI, and Director of Nursing Services by nationally recognized organizations and holds Master Teacher status in all 3 certifications. Thank you, Maureen, for sharing your knowledge today and expertise with us on this most timely topic. I now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Just wanted to review the objectives really quickly. We do have a very information-packed session for you today in the hour and a half that you'll be on with us. So we're going to be explaining the changes to the 2019 that are being made right now, to the FiveStar program. So I didn't want to come back with a quality program that had some changes to it and not let you know about that. So last week, changes were announced as far as the FiveStar program and how that will be calculated. It's going to be completely different, so I wanted to review that information with you since it's the most timely information and changes regarding quality. We'll review the SNF QRP reporting program, which is going to be different than what you're going to hear about FiveStar. It's used in a different way. The QRP affects revenue, and the FiveStar is more of a report card, so to speak, that is going to look at your quality. We'll also discuss the SNF value-based purchasing program and how that program works and metrics that you need to keep your eye on as far as being a provider in long-term care. We're going to identify the overlaps between the different programs and how PDPM will affect some of these programs and what areas you're going to need to concentrate on moving into PDPM that will overlap. And we're going to talk about some next steps towards improvement of these different areas. And I'll give you a few little tips on how you can use the information as far as improving quality so you can include it in your QRP programs as well. So at the end of the program, we'll have a Q&A. And we'll go through the slides initially, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers on any of the programs that we've already gone through. So under CMS's current measurement reporting program, we have the quality measure programs that we've had since probably 2008 or so that are usually posted on Nursing Home Compare. From that, we have other CASPER reporting components that are available to us that we can go in and get different reports out of the system. We also have our FiveStar reporting systems, our FiveStar rating system. We have the PEPR reports, which are probably coming out pretty soon. They're usually out in the spring. The PEPR reports come from your MAC or your Medicare Administrative Contractor, and they really review changes. The reason why I think those of you that are administrators will need to look at those PEPR reports is that data will be used to compare once you move into PDPM. So they're looking at different ADL components, your RU utilization, your length of stay, those types of things in the PEPR reports. And if they see a lot of changes from RUGS 4 over to PDPM, now they expect there are going to be some changes and some reductions in the amount of therapy that we use, but how much we drop off will determine whether someone prefers to audit you or not. Again, we'll talk about the SNF value-based purchasing program, and that's another measure that's from CMS that's really measuring our rehospitalizations, and that's another reporting structure. That's the one measure that's in that program now, as opposed to the quality reporting program that adds multiple measures at a time. Now, your value-based purchasing program is going to cost you 2% of your revenue to put into the program. That's your sort of skin in the game. And then we'll talk about how the revenue comes back to you when we get to that portion. And then the QRP quality reporting program has the opportunity to reduce your revenue by 2% based on your reporting. And right now, the reporting is looking at performance. Did you give the information that's required over to CMS, and are you reporting these metrics? In our lifetime, in the next couple of years, those metrics will turn around to outcome measures. So right now you get credit for reporting, then your measurements will be used and sort of compared against other thresholds across the country to determine whether you are above or below acceptable thresholds, and that will likely impact your revenue down the road. Now, if CMS doesn't like what they see in any of these programs, or they anticipate that there might be fraudulent or abusive practices happening within the program, then they call for our medical records, okay? And that can be through your Medicare Administrative Contractor or through a RAC auditor. But if they don't like what they see, or they see pattern changes, significant pattern changes, it's likely you will be getting requests for medical records because they want to verify that the information was accurate and that the services that we're providing are reasonable and necessary to treat the illness or injury of the patients we were taking care of. Now, let's get right into the FiveStar survey components. CMS had promised when we went into the dark days for survey back on 11/28/17 that for the entire year, the survey stars would have stayed the same, but they were going to sort of stall the program until they brought it back again. Now they're ready to bring the program back again. They told us there was only going to be a 2-year look back for surveys. But last week, when the FiveStar Technical Users Guide came out, they went back to the 3 years. So if you are one of those facilities where you thought you were going to have a bad survey 3 years ago that was going to fall off your report, once the survey starts open back up again, you're not going to have that opportunity because CMS did decide that they're going to go back to that 3-year look-back period rather than the 2-year that they had told us back in 2017. So again, the survey rates include substantiated surveys, whether they're complaint surveys or annual surveys. They're only substantiated results that get counted. So if you had a complaint survey and someone came into the facility, they surveyed your facility and found that there were no findings, obviously no points would go against you. It's just when you have substantiated complaints or annual surveys. So with that, each deficiency is weighted by scope and severity. And then that's how you get your survey points, and I'll show you a slide on that, in a few minutes. Just to let you know, your annual surveys, the way that they're going to weight the surveys is the way that they had it in the FiveStar program before. So your most recent survey that you've had is worth half of your total survey score. The survey that you had the year prior to that is worth 1/3 of the score, and the survey you had 2 years prior to that is worth 1/6 of the score. And that's for the annual component. Your complaint surveys also count in this. So again, it's only substantiated findings, so not anything that doesn't have any findings attached to it. And they're looking back 36 months for complaint surveys. So it does have a 3-year window that it goes back, but every month the calendar updates itself. Okay, so if we're in March, it's going back 12 months from March to look at your most recent survey. Okay, so with the last calendar year, any complaint surveys, regardless of the number of complaint surveys that you had, all of those complaint surveys, the total points that you got in those surveys, half of that would go towards your survey weight, in addition to what you got in your annual survey. Any surveys that you had 13 to 24 months ago are worth 1/3 of the weight, and any surveys from 25 to 36 months prior are worth 1/6 of the weight. So when you're adding up, what you're looking at for your survey stars and trying to figure out where you're going to fall, you're going to need to look back those 3 years and determine the number of survey deficiencies that you've received. Now, when they come back into your facility to put you back into compliance, they call that a resurvey or a revisit, okay? If they come back in one time, the first time that they come back in, the surveyors, and they put you back into compliance, there are no non-compliance points that are assigned against you. If they have to come in a second time, 50% of the points that you earned in that survey that you had will be added back into the survey point threshold, okay? If they have to come in a third time, 70% of those points get added back in. And if they come back a fourth time, 85% of those scores will be added back in. And generally, when I get to this in front of a live audience, I tell them if they have to come back in a fourth time, you should probably pack your bags. But I'm just really kidding about that. Okay, so when we look at those, we're also looking at the resurveys, and these points are included in the survey threshold as well. So you have your annual surveys, your complaint surveys, and then your resurveys or coming back in to put you in compliance. This is the scope and severity grid. So based on the level of deficiency that you receive in your facility, it assigns a number of points. So on the left-hand side, you can see the severity scores. There's no actual harm with potential for more than minimal, actual harm, and then the IJ up top. On the right-hand side, you have the scope. When you're looking at isolated, that is, you're looking at an isolated issue. Patterns would be a few patients involved, and widespread would be many patients involved. So that language is very subjective. Depending on the surveyor that you have in your building, what she or he determines as few versus many will change your scope on your scope and severity rating. So you can see down the bottom, the A, B, and C points have no values. You don't have any non-compliance points assigned against you. D is 4 points, and E is 8 points, and so on. You see the gray areas. Some of them have different and larger point spreads that are within the parentheses. And that is based on the survey tag that you received at that level. So if the tag that you received is in quality of care, quality of life, or resident behavior and facility practices, you get the higher amount of points assigned against you rather than the lower amount, okay? And again, if you're you have past noncompliance and the severity is immediate jeopardy, then you're at least looking at a G-level deficiency here. So this is how they weight the survey threshold with this point structure, regardless of whether it's an annual, a complaint, and then again with the resurveys, when they come back into compliance, they just add the points that you've received on that prior survey that they're trying to clear you from. So again, this is the point spreads for survey. So that was a really big change that we found there, is that we were expecting a 2-year look back, and we ended up with a 3-year look back. Now, there are also FiveStar changes to the staffing level, okay? So we'll talk about those as well. So currently, CMS is getting their staffing data from what we submit quarterly for PBJ. Formerly, it used to come from the 671 form that you completed during survey. It includes your full-time employees, your part-time employees, and your contracted staff. So agency staff, as well as if you contracted someone to come in and work for your facility for a certain period of time, they would be included as well. Okay? I realize we submit more than nursing hours to PBJ. We submit a lot more than that. They're pulling off some of your nursing hours, and I'll show you which categories are going into the FiveStar staffing. Now, when it comes to your census or your staffing measures, they used to get that from the 672, looking at the number of patients that we had at the facility when they came in for survey. Now, they're no longer using the resident census and condition report. They're using the MDS census survey, okay? And then looking at the MDS census, and that's going to differ than your facility census, and it's not going to match all the time. And the reason is sometimes a patient will go out to the hospital and they're not going more than 24 hours, but their head is not in the bed at midnight. They would not be counted on your facility census, but they would still count in your MDS census because they have not been out more than 24 hours. So it's a non-billable day when the head's not in the bed, but as far as MDS census goes, they're still considered your patient unless they're gone 24 hours or more or have been admitted to the hospital. Then they move over to hospital census. Some things to look out for here are making sure that you do not have late discharge assessments because as a former MDS coordinator, and my background is I was a director of nursing, I was an MDS coordinator, I was a rehab director, and I was a Medicare biller. So most departments, I think the only thing I haven't done is dietary and housekeeping. But when we're looking at that, I know, having been a former MDS coordinator, that's probably the MDS that I would leave. If I needed to cut a corner and leave an MDS that was going to be late, it would be a discharge. You don't want your OBRAs to be late because that is going to affect your survey. Your PPS assessments are never late because your biller's right over your shoulder saying, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? So we're never late with those. So the discharge assessments are usually the ones that would go by the wayside. But what can happen here is that if that discharge assessments are being completed and sent to CMS late, it's going to overstate your census and therefore dilute your staffing. So if you're late on 10 patients who were discharged a month ago and you still haven't done the discharge assessments for those, it's going to overstate your census by 10 patients and then dilute your staffing. So we need to be careful about that. Again, expected staffing rate, so it's going to take what you submit for PBJ, that's your actual staffing based on what you're submitting. Then it's going to case mix adjust those staffing levels based on the RUG-4 categories. Now, it had been the RUG-3 categories before, but now it's case mix adjusted based on the RUG-4 categories. So every patient that's had an MDS for the previous quarter, looking at the same quarter that you submit your PBJ data from, it's going to compare the acuity of the patients that you had in your building during that time to determine how much expected staffing CMS should see. Then it's going to take a look at that adjustment, and it's going to compare your expected staffing against expected staffing in other facilities that have similar acuities to yours across the country. And say, in San Francisco, what is the staffing like? In Helena, Montana, what is the staffing like for an average facility like this? In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, what is the staffing like for an average facility like this? And then they'll compare you, and then they'll give you an adjusted staffing number. So of the CMS data, this is one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult, to recreate because you have no idea how other facilities are, how their acuity levels are. Only CMS really has that data. So it's difficult to recreate this information. And the higher the acuity, the higher the expectation is for increased staffing. So, which job codes are included in the staffing component? So there's an RN staffing component, and then there's a total nursing staffing component, which includes your RN, your LPNs, your nursing assistants, which includes aides in training, or med techs if your state does use med techs. So in the RN hours, it's going to include your director of nursing, and she's usually job code 5. It's also going to include registered nurses with administrative duties that are under job code 6. So this would be an MDS coordinator, if you had a quality nurse, if you had a separate Medicare nurse, something like that. Formerly, when we used to use the 671 form, if we had LPNs with administrative duties, like if you had an MDS coordinator who was an LPN, she used to count in the RN hours. So when they made changes to this, and they started using PBJ, you lost that. So if that was your facility, that's how you were impacted with the change once they moved over to PBJ last April. The additional RNs that are included in the RN number include job code 7, and those are your registered nurses in the facility. Your LPN hours that count towards total staffing would include your licensed practical or vocational nurses with administrative duties, as well as the LPNs or LVNs under job code 9. So the other nurses that are in the facility would also count as well. In total staffing, we also include the nurse aid hours, like I had mentioned before. It includes your CNAs, and they would be under job code 10. Your aides in training, especially if you have an in-house program that you train CNAs in your facility, they'd be under job code 11. And then your med techs are under job code 12 if your state allows those, and they would be included in your total staffing as well. Okay, so then you have your RN hours that are just the top bullet, and then your total clinical hours, which are all 3 bullets combined. And that's what goes into your staffing numbers in the FiveStar report. So the daily census, like I had mentioned before, is derived from the MDS census. And they're calculating it based on the reporting period for the census that you're reporting into CMS and the period of time that you're reporting staffing for. So if you're looking at calendar year 2018 and you're reporting second quarter, which is April 1st through June 30th, 2018, it's going to look into the repository system where the MDSs go and extract the MDS data for the residents that were in the facility during that period of time, okay? So if we're late with some of the MDSs, it could overstate your census here, and we're going to want to really be careful for that, okay? So, for example, if we're looking at second quarter 2018, it's going to go extract the MDS data from April 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2018 to look for anyone who was in your building during that previous year to see whether they were still a patient, okay? So, some including who is a discharged resident, they're utilizing certain criteria for that component. So if a resident had an MDS discharge assessment, and the discharge date on the assessment will determine whether the patient's no longer in the facility. Okay, so it makes sense. If I did a discharge assessment, the assessment reference date that I use is the date of discharge, and I'm going to assume that the patient's no longer in the building. For any patient that had 150 days or more without an MDS, it's going to assume that that resident no longer lives in your facility. So there is a catch-up point where if you're late on your discharge MDSs, where it will assume that the patient's no longer there, but you certainly don't want to be 150 days late on your MDSs. So it'll look back from that 150th day from the last assessment, okay, that's in the repository and determine that the person no longer resides in your facility, okay? If there's no assessment in there, they're going to assume that the person's no longer in your facility. In order to avoid this problem, CASPER reports do have an OBRA missed assessment report that's in the CASPER system that MDS coordinators should go into to verify on a monthly basis to make sure that they didn't forget anyone's discharge assessments, because it can happen. You can have a patient that you thought was going to go home one day, ended up going home another day. You thought you did the assessment, you didn't, end up doing the assessment. And, you ended up skipping it or forgetting it. So, it happens, but there are opportunities to identify that through this missed MDS assessment report that can come out of CASPER. It can help you to identify if there are any sort of laggers there that you forgot to do those discharge assessments on. If you get information back that says data not available, they're looking for unrealistic or improbable PBJ data. So they're saying if you're reporting total nursing staffing from job codes 5 through 12, so all of you, from your director of nursing all the way down to your med tech, and that adds up to less than an hour and a half per resident day or hours per resident day, then you're shown as data not available. Okay, because it's generally unrealistic that you're going to have less than 1.5 hours per resident day. And the total nursing staffing job codes, again, the same 5 through 12, you're looking at greater than 12 hours per resident day. And we actually work with a company in one of the Midwest and Eastern states that had their PBJ review. And they're a CCRC that does a lot of admissions and discharges from the community as well as from their own CCRC. And their staffing rating is like a 7.8. They ended up getting an audit because their hours were so high. If you're above 12 hours per resident day, then it's going to show as data not available because they think that that's improbable. Then the nurses' aid staffing components, and this is just looking at your nurses' aides, your aides in training, and your med techs. If that ends up being greater than 5.25 hours per resident day, that's going to come back as data not available as well. So you have opportunities for whoever submits your PBJ data. They should be going in and getting the validation reports back once they submit the data to make sure that it went through and there aren't any errors. It's also a good idea to submit the data on a monthly basis rather than waiting till the end of the quarter. Because again, if there are problems with the system or there are too many people that are uploading to the system and you end up getting kicked off, if it's the last day of the deadline and you get past midnight, it's sort of like too bad, so sad. They're not going to upload your data, and I've seen that happen to many people. The other thing is you want to audit the data to make sure that there aren't any errors or any improbable data that was submitted. So it's a good idea to submit it on a monthly basis. Then you can go in and get the report. You have plenty of time to fix it, and you're sort of not under the gun to get it back because you're only submitting on the last day that the information is due. Okay, I've seen a lot of people that ended up with 1-star ratings because they weren't able to get the data in time, or it had so many errors that they weren't able to correct it during the data correction period. All right, so let's talk about cut point tables when it comes to staffing. So these are the national cut point tables that will be updated April 2019. So when you folks get your 5-star reports out for April, they're going to be significantly different than they have been in prior years. Okay. This is the first time that the hours have been updated. I want to say February 20, maybe 15 or so, 16 might be the last time that they were updated. So these are the thresholds for your RN is the top line and your total staffing is the bottom line. Looking at what determines a rating of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 stars. Okay. Actually, this second table that we have in here is a little bit easier to read. Your RN hours are along the left-hand side. Your total staffing nursing hours are along the top of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what happened here is that you can see down the bottom that there's an opportunity if you are 5 stars in total staffing and 5 stars in RN staffing, you will end up as 5 stars for overall staffing. They've also added the opportunity that if you are 5 stars for RN staffing, yet only 4 stars for total staffing, you have another opportunity to become 5-star for staffing. That's a change. So they added a little bit more weight to the RN component than the total staffing component. And you have 2 opportunities to become 5-star staffing now, rather than we only had 1 opportunity before. So they added some additional weight to that RN component, thinking that if you have more RNs on staff, that equates to better quality care. Okay. All right, scoring exceptions. If you fail to submit your staffing data by the deadline, you're going to receive a 1-star rating for the entire quarter. If that happens the next quarter, you get a 1-star rating for that quarter, and so on and so on and so on. So again, you want to make sure that you are submitting this data as with enough time to make any corrections should any errors. And most of the time, I have to tell you, with folks, they end up being technical errors in the code or in the way that it's being transmitted to CMS, not necessarily the data that you're submitting. So again, I just want to caution people that you should be going in and getting out the employee listing, and there are multiple PBJ reports that come out once you submit your data. Get that out, become familiar with it, so that you can look at opportunities to improve your staffing that might help your staffing ratings. If we submit staffing data that indicates that there were 4 or more days where you did not have RN hours that were reported, and again, it could be your director of nursing, nurses, RNs with admin duties, or any other RNs in the building. If you have 4 or more days with no RN hours, you are also receiving, drop down to a 1-star for staffing. That's a change. It had previously been 7 days or more. Now they dropped that down to 4 days or more, okay? So again, they'll drop you down to a 1-star for overall staffing and for RN staffing for the entire quarter, okay? So make sure that when you pull that data back, you didn't forget anything that you're submitting to CMS. Again, if you have the opportunity to review the data, it's in our best interest to do that rather than sitting there with an error that you're not aware of. All right, CMS is conducting audits of nursing homes that are going to be verifying the data. That happens in 2 ways. So when the surveyors are coming into the building, they're looking at your staffing when they come in, as well as comparatively what you've had. They also have a subcontractor, Myers and Stauffer, that's coming around to audit facilities as well. It's generally an off-site audit. They will send you a lovely letter telling you that you've been chosen to be audited for PBJ. They'll give you data. They'll give you a list of data that they want to collect from you. And again, if you don't submit the data back to them, then your star rating gets pressed down to a 1. So you really need to respond to these requests if you get them. They're looking for significant discrepancies between the hours that are reported and the hours that are verified. And again, I have to tell you, being involved in a lot of this for a lot of our customers, the folks that are asking for the data have no idea how the FiveStar system works. They have no idea about the MDS census and why it doesn't match your facility census. They may be asking for a facility census and then they find a discrepancy and they don't have a clue as to how come that's different, which is why I wanted to make sure that you understood in the beginning that the MDS census may not match your facility in-house census because of those components of when you do and do not do an MDS. So make sure that someone in your facility is well versed in how to explain that should you end up getting one of these love letters from Myers and Stauffer. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about FiveStar quality measures, okay, as we're moving along here as well. When we look at the QM, they're going to be radically different than what we've seen before. So we have some cut point tables that are deciles, meaning 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. We have some cut point tables, especially in the pressure ulcers that are 25, 50, 75, and 100 for the short-term pressure ulcers. Then we have other quality measures that have now been moved from decile, from quintile to decile. So instead of having the 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 like we had with the quintile, now we have 15-point thresholds up to 150 points, where previously we were only able to get up to 100 points for each quality measure. Now some of the quality measures are up to 150 points. So when you're looking at these changes, it's going to make a significant difference and a significant impact into your QM ratings in your FiveStar reports. Okay. So the measures that are in the FiveStar program, we have long-stay measures and short-stay measures. Long-stay measures are patients that have been in your building more than 100 days. Short-stay measures are patients that have been in your building 100 or fewer days. Okay, so it's regardless of payer source. They don't have to be Medicare Part A. It's just looking at how many days the head was in the bed. If the patient leaves the facility and is on a leave of absence, those days do not count towards the cumulative days in the facility. It only counts the days that the patient was actually an inpatient on your census and counted. So what are some of the long-stay quality measures? We're looking at the ADL component, those folks that needed increased help with ADLs. And again, that's taking from Section G, not Section GG. So likely the information that your CNA is complete. Residents whose ability to move independently worsened. So we're looking at how these folks locomote on the unit, okay? So it doesn't necessarily mean ambulation. If I was independent in a wheelchair and was able to get around the unit before, I want to be able to maintain that independence. High-risk residents with pressure ulcers. This number will likely be higher than you've seen before in previous FiveStar reports, and the reason is because they added unstageable wounds to this measure where they had not had those in this measure before. It had only been stage 2, 3, or 4. Now they're adding the unstageables into this measure, so that this number is likely to be higher than what you've previously reported, okay? And that's making it more similar to the quality reporting measure for pressure ulcers, and we'll talk about that when we get there because unstageables have been added to that measure as well. Percentage of residents that have a catheter inserted into their bladder, that's another one of the long-stay measures that we're looking at. Residents with a urinary tract infection, and there are certain criteria on when a urinary tract infection is reported in the MDS. It's a 30-day look-back period. It excludes the first MDS, whether it's a 5-day or an admission MDS, and looks at the ones subsequent to that. And one of the long-term measures that have been on before, looking at the percentage of residents who were restrained on a daily basis, that measure has been removed from the FiveStar report. You guys have done such a great job out there reducing restraints that they no longer feel that that's an area that they need to focus on, so that's been removed from the FiveStar report. Additional long-stay measures, residents experiencing one or more falls with major injury. Now, watch out for this one because this is one of the measures that stays on your FiveStar reports the longest. Because of the look-back periods and because of the way that this is measured, these can stay on your FiveStar report up to 369 days. Okay, that's regardless of whether your person was discharged or whether they have expired. They could still be in the look back. So just because someone's no longer with you doesn't mean they're no longer haunting you because they're going to still end up on this report. Percentage of residents who self-report moderate to severe pain. This will be the same in the short measures when we get there. This is the long-term measure. I have some issues with this measure myself because I know that drug-seeking folks, if you have a facility that takes a lot of folks that have histories of drug-seeking behavior, they're generally telling you that their pain level is 10 on a constant basis because that's the way that they get medicated. And they know the game, and it doesn't mean that they're in pain. It just means that they know how to manipulate the staff to be able to get additional medication. And so I think that there should be some kind of a risk adjustment for patients that have a history of drug-seeking behavior. And I did ask that CMS add that when they had the QRP training last year, so we'll see what comes out of that. But I don't think that it gives a fair representation of some facilities. It doesn't mean that you're not managing their pain. It doesn't mean that you don't have a sufficient pain management program. It just may mean that the person knows how to manipulate the system to get more medication out, especially in the opioid crisis that we're in now. Percentage of residents who receive an antipsychotic medication. This is any MDS. If they're taking an antipsychotic medication, that's going to be reported. Watch your compazines here. Sometimes you use them for nausea. They are still an antipsychotic, and they will come back to bite you here if you use them. Two measures that have been added. We're looking at the number of hospitalizations per 1,000 long-stay resident days. So they're not only measuring rehospitalizations of your Medicare population, now they're looking at your long-stay residents and the number of patients that you're discharging to the hospital who are long-term care residents. They're also measuring the number of emergency room visits for your long-term care patients. Those two are both claims-based measures. These will be the first long-stay resident claims-based measures that we will have in the program. This is something brand new for us. You can see that CMS is incentivizing you to treat in place, okay? They do not want patients that have conditions that can be treated in a nursing home to be going to a hospital, such as UTIs and, C. diff and other things that we can manage in our facilities. For the short stay residents, we're looking at percentage of residents who made improvement in function. And again, this is not using Section GG. This is only using Section G that the CNAs are filling out. It's taking 3 different components of ADLs and measuring the patients to see if they've improved in their function since from the time that you got them at admission to the time that they were discharged and you're ending their stay. Other additional short stays measures are looking at residents with pressure ulcers. Newer worsening pressure ulcers. This will look similar when we talk about the QRP program. And this is looking at someone who came in without a pressure ulcer that developed one after they came to you. So body audits are extremely important. So is pressure ulcer staging if they're coming in with a pressure ulcer. If in the hospital they called it a stage 3 pressure ulcer, it looks a little bit better when they get admitted to you and you want to call it a stage 2, do not. It is a healing stage 3, okay? You don't want to take credit for that being a 2, and then it rolls back into a 3, and it makes it look like you worsened the pressure ulcer when you're looking at that, it is a healing stage 3 pressure ulcer. Again, residents who self-report moderate to severe pain, we saw that in the long stay. The measure is the same in the short stay. And the percentage of residents who newly received an antipsychotic medication. This is a little bit different than the long stay measure. The long stay measure is taking any MDS for those long stay patients and whether we have antipsychotics on them. This is looking for a patient who doesn't come in with one. So the first assessment that you do, whether it's a 5-day or an admission or whatever, does not have any antipsychotic medications on it. And then a subsequent MDS that you do later in the patient's stay does have antipsychotic medication reported. That's on the patient's trigger here for this short stay component. Other short stay measures, we have some claims-based measures. Again, percentage of residents who are rehospitalized after a nursing home admission. That's measuring 30 days from the time that you admit the patient, making sure that you are not rehospitalizing them, okay? It's also looking at percentage of residents who have an outpatient emergency room visit. Again, they want us to treat the patients in-house as often as we can. And then you have your successful discharge to the community, okay? Successful discharge to the community is looking at patients that you discharge as their final discharge destination back into the community. They need to stay out in the community for at least 31 days. They don't get rehospitalized. They don't go to a long-term care hospital. And I don't know how you're going to do this, but you got to keep them alive. So the patient cannot die in the 30-day window. All right. There are some exclusions to this, and we'll talk about the exclusions when we get to the quality reporting program. Again, these are all claims-based measures. They are risk-adjusted. They go by hospital and skilled nursing facility claims, and that's how they're determining these percentages. Okay. So keep in mind that in the FiveStar program, the rehospitalization measure starts at the front door from admission, and when we talk about QRP, that's going to start from the back door. So it looks like the same measure, but it's being measured in a different way. Okay. Okay, these are the cut point tables for the quality measures that you'll get with your April FiveStar reports. So now we're going to be reporting long stay quality measure stars, short stay quality measure stars, and then overall quality measure stars, where before you only got one QM rating, and that was just your overall threshold combined. So you can see now with the different point thresholds, they go up to 2,500 points now, looking at all of the short and the long stay together. That's the maximum amount of points that are available in the quality measure FiveStar program, up to 2,500. So when we're looking at those different deciles and how things are calculated in the new program, it's going to make it a little more difficult to show FiveStar status in quality measures. Okay, so we need to sort of be aware of that. Okay, this is looking at a FiveStar report. This is an older FiveStar report. The two blue arrows are two of the newer items that were added. The percentage of residents whose ability to move independently worsened, and then the ones who made improvement in function. When you get your FiveStar reports in April, you will see those two long-term claims-based measures added with the rehospitalizations for long-term folks and the EDUs for long-term folks. Those will be added to these reports as well. This is a copy of the FiveStar claims-based measures that we have in there currently. Again, like I said, April will be updating for some long-term as well as short-term claims-based measures. And these are looking again at your successful discharge to the community, the residents that were rehospitalized, and the EDU. Let me go back for 1 second to this slide. One thing I forgot to mention is that these last two columns, your state and national averages, are great areas when you're putting performance improvement projects together to include in your QRP plan. And you know requirements of participation in phase 3 is coming into play about a month after PDPM comes. So those are still things that we still need to keep our eye on, even though we're all trying to prepare and learn as much as we can about PDPM. Again, these are really good areas to sort of determine where there might be some quality areas you might want to improve in as a facility, and you can use the state and national averages for benchmarking and thresholds as you determine what you want your improvement to be in those certain areas. I wanted to make sure I didn't go past that. Okay, so back to the claims-based measures. You have an observed rate, which is just straight data. You have an expected rate, where you're being looked at to determine what are others in the long-term care community doing and what does CMS expect based on your admissions and discharges and the conditions that we report for the patients that we have. What do they expect? And then they risk adjust that. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. And then they assign your rating points like they do for the other quality measures. Some of them will have up to 150 points now. And again, your last two columns looking at state and national risk-adjusted measurements that you can use for benchmarking. So if you're looking to reduce rehospitalizations, and maybe your rate, this facility's risk-adjusted rate of 21.5, state average of 21.3, and risk-adjusted nationally was 21.1. So, you know, maybe they wanted to reduce below the national, and they wanted to get down to, you know, maybe 20.8% or 20.9 and want to drop a full percent. These would be great areas to determine what those thresholds may be. Okay, so that's it for the changes for the FiveStar report, and I know that that was a lot of information, but now we're going to add 2 more quality reporting programs onto that information. So the QRP program has some measures that are in it. This started October 1st of 2016, and this came out of the IMPACT Act. The QRP program came out of the IMPACT Act. In 2016, we had some MDS-based measures. We had functional status and cognition changes from admission to discharge, which is measuring your section GG, okay? So this is part of quality reporting. This is only measuring Medicare Part A traditional fee-for-service, not managed care, not any other payer source, okay? This is just measuring how you manage your Medicare folks, all right? So this GG component, don't forget that this has a care plan attached to it. So it's functional status and cognitive changes from admission to discharge and a care plan that addresses function. So until CMS determines how that care plan communication information is going to be exchanged, put that into the resident's care plan now, okay? So add it to your, whatever you call it, comprehensive care plan, resident care plan, patient-centered care plan. When you start to complete section GG, you should be looking at what are the residents' goals for admission, what do they expect to get out of this, and that should be included in your baseline care plans as well with requirements for participation. You can see how CMS is planning on having all of this gel together. So they want the resident's voice and choice more involved in baseline care plan. They expect that to be completed within 48 hours. We're expected to give a summary of the baseline care plan or the summary of the care plan to the resident and or their responsible parties or representatives by the time you get to care conference so that they want them involved a lot more. And that was part of the triple aim back in 2011. So don't forget to add that care plan information into your care plans when it comes to section GG goals. Skin integrity and changes with new or worsening pressure ulcers. Again, this is not the same as the ShortStay measure that we talked about in FiveStar. This is measuring all Medicare patients, regardless of how many days that they've been in your building. So you can have a long-term patient who goes out to the hospital and comes back. They're going to count in the QRP program. It doesn't matter if they've been there, 10 days or 10,000 days. Again, they're adding the unstageable pressure ulcers to this, which they've done this past October 2018. So you likely saw some changes or will see some changes to your QRP data once you pull that out. Again, we're looking at, we passed the window for changes to previous quarters as of February 15th. Your next quarter closes May 15th, so make sure that your staff that are responsible for verifying this data are doing that now. And verifying the coding of the MDS, the data that you had in the medical record, and the reporting that you're doing. If you need to make any corrections, you need to make them well before May 15th is the deadline. But again, you don't want to wait till the deadline, because if a lot of people are inputting and you can't get into the system, you want to make sure you have enough time to make those changes. Falls with major injury sounds the same as it does on the FiveStar report. It's measured from the same components of the FiveStar report. And those were the three initial QRP measures that we had in the program. In 2017, they added 3 claims-based measures. So they added the potentially preventable rehospitalization, and that's not the same as the measure that you have in FiveStar. The FiveStar measure is just looking at all-cause, all-condition rehospitalization, which is different than potentially preventable. Okay? So all-cause, all-condition, the example that I usually give when I teach this is you did a great job with the patient, they're happy with the facility's happy with the patient's outcome, they're ready to leave, they're done with their program, you're packing them up in the car, and they get in a car accident on the way home, you're getting dinged for that. Okay? Potentially preventable would take the car accident out, but the patient you send back to the hospital for a UTI, a condition that you can completely treat in a nursing home, is considered potentially preventable, and that will count against you. Okay? We'll have a little bit more on that in the slides as they come down as we get into the program. Discharge to the community, again, we're still looking at successful discharges. They have to stay out at least 31 days. They can't be readmitted. And then the last measure that they added for claims-based is Medicare spending per beneficiary, or MSPB. If you're not familiar with this and you are in administration or a CFO, I would become familiar with this, and this is likely to affect us as well with PDPM. They want Medicare, they want us to be considered valuable partners in providing good quality care and not overspending in the Medicare program. And ways to overspend, at least currently in the RUG-4 system, are going to be always shooting for the RU, even if the patient doesn't require that level of therapy, and extending length of stay. Okay? Sometimes length of stay should be extended for some patients who are at a high risk for rehospitalization. Maybe they just need an extra day or 2 extra days. And again, moving into PDPM, with a restorative nursing component, there may be some patients that, and I'm not talking about your 7-year-old hips and knees, and I'm not necessarily talking about, a large chunk of your ACO patients here, but you may have some patients in their 90s that don't have a caregiver at home, or maybe it's a male patient who's going home with his, 90-year-old, 75-pound wife who really can't be a caretaker for him because she just isn't strong enough to do it. Those are the patients I'm talking about, because generally in this world that we live in now, we're cutting patients off at the 720 level and letting them go home right from there. We don't give them an opportunity to practice what they learned with rehab before they go home, or a lot of facilities are not doing that or don't have programs for that. And we really don't do the patient any justice by sending them home without knowing that they can be successful at home. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a side. I'm going to show you a slide with MSPB information. It's more of a visual slide. It'll help to explain it a little bit more because you're being measured with the amount of dollars that you're spending in the facility as well as a 30-day period afterwards. Okay, so for 10/1/2018, they also made some additions into this program. They added the med reconciliation or drug regimen review. And that's expected to be done on admission and throughout the patient's stay. Every single time there's a potentially clinically significant medication issue, it needs to be addressed by midnight of the next day every time it comes up. So if we don't get medications in, if the pharmacy didn't deliver them, if a patient isn't taking or refusing their medication, if there's a discrepancy in the dose, in the route, in the anything, those can be clinically significant, and they're expecting us to follow up by midnight of the next day with that. And that involves physician communication. Okay, so sometimes it's not the nurses that are the problem. Sometimes it's the physician that's the problem. In addition to those, they have 4 measures in addition to the one that we measured about section GG for the very first one that are looking at other section GG information. So in SNP QRP, 5 of the measures revolve around section GG. All right? So you got that section 10-1-2016. What happened was many folks gave that to the rehab department to do, and as we move into PDPM, where you may not be putting patients on rehab who might not be the most clinically appropriate folks to be on a rehab program, you know, and I say this in a joking fashion, that sometimes there's patients that the therapists are kind of uncomfortable putting on programs because they don't think that they really could benefit from rehab, and we're still getting them on the program so that we can cover them under the Medicare skilled benefits. When we're looking at those folks, you know, we may be putting some of those folks on a restorative nursing program when they come back in instead of a rehabilitative therapy program. And again, when you're looking at that, who's going to get the information for GG? You need to think about moving it to PDPM because this isn't going to go away. And if you have patients that are not on rehab caseloads, how are you collecting the GG information to show your improvement? Because if you're not reporting that information for at least 20% of your patients, you're going to lose 2% of your revenue from this program. So it's something to seriously consider. So we're looking at 4 measures. 2 of them are looking at the change in their admission performance versus their discharge performance. So again, how was the patient when you got them? And then what were they like upon discharge? Make sure that that information is accurate. You're reporting their usual performance. Because what sometimes happens is if you just gave this to rehab and you don't have any input from the nurses or the nurses' aides the other 23 hours of the day, it might not be the usual performance for the patient. It might be the usual performance that they're seeing in the rehab gym. And they're usually seeing them at their best. So take that information, just do yourself a favor. Take a couple of patients, look at the discharge performance, go back to the aides on 3 to 11 and 11 to 7, and ask them if this is accurate information about the patient. Because probably, I'd say 70% of the time, 75% of the time, they're going to come back and say, I need to help her with this, I need to help her with this, I need to help her with that. Okay? And that's the information that needs to be relayed to your downstream user so that they can set up an appropriate plan of care for this person when they're discharged. So when this information is shared between upstream and downstream users, which is the plan, when a home health agency receives this information and they assume that the patient's independent and they don't schedule PT or OT and they only schedule a nurse a couple times a week and that patient goes home and falls off the toilet and someone finds them 3 days later, did we really do them justice? Okay. The other piece is looking at discharge, self-care, and mobility score. Now, CMS is looking at the 20 years of MDSs and electronic claim and cost reports that we've been submitting as an industry and looking at them as far as those scores and seeing what the average patient that has that type of a condition and those comorbidities, how long is their average length of stay, and looking at what level of independence they should be at when they're discharged. So sort of it's like a CMS secret number that you need to meet, that you don't know about, but you still need to meet it. Okay, so when this data comes out, it's going to be very interesting. So they've been collecting it since October 1st of 2018. So you want to make sure that you have someone that's looking at this information. The last piece here under QRP is looking at care plan and communication of health information. Because HIPAA is so tight, it's difficult to get that information in between providers. So you may be able to have access into hospital records, but they don't necessarily feed right from the hospital system into your software system. You're likely data entering information that you're looking at on a screen. But eventually they want us to be able to communicate at least health information, and I think that they're looking initially at medication reconciliation as well as function with dysfunctional care plans for us to be able to report that to our downstream user, whether it's assisted living, home health, or, wherever the patient goes afterwards. So because of HIPAA, that sort of a little bit further down the road. It might be 2020. It might be a little bit later than that, but just know that that's going to be another component that we will be reporting. So again, the MDS information is collected through MDS submissions. The claims are collected through claims information. The reporting data when it comes to the 80% that's missing that can get you that 2% slap on the hand, that's looking at MDS data submission, not claim submission, okay? So again, at least 100% of your MDSs have to have at least 80% of the data, or at least 80% of the MDSs that you submit have to have 100% of the data. Both pretty much mean the same thing. Do not dash out the information that you need to report the quality measures, okay, which includes the covariates. So covariates are other items in the MDS that risk adjust patients. For instance, when you're talking about pressure ulcers, one of the covariates there is bed mobility. How does the patient move about in bed? If they need assistance to move in bed, they're more likely to develop a pressure ulcer, so it risk adjusts them. So if you're missing or dashed out bed mobility on the MDS, you're not reporting all the data that you need for that pressure ulcer component, and you could be looking at a 2% reduction. The other thing that I just want to talk about for a second is managed care, okay? When you have managed care folks that you're reporting MDSs on, and this is more related to your FiveStar reports than QRP, because FiveStar reports all payer sources, where QRP is really just looking at traditional Medicare. But again, why would you want to report data that you don't need to? So if you're doing an MDS for a managed care company because they would like to pay you by the RUG level, and there is no OBRA reason attached, meaning admission, annual, quarterly, significant change, and you do not submit that MDS into the federal repository because Medicare is not the payer for that patient. You're violating HIPAA, okay? So you only report things that are required for treatment or payment. Those are exclusions to HIPAA. Medicare is not the payer. Your managed care company is the payer. Medicare does require, or CMS does require MDSs for admission, annual, quarterly, and significant change, but they do not require the 5, 14, 30, 60, 90 for managed care folks. So don't send those MDSs. You're violating HIPAA, number one. And number two, why would you want another fall with major injury that you didn't need to report to be stuck on your FiveStar report and hurting your quality measures? It just doesn't make sense when you never had to report it from the beginning. Okay, so if you end up at the 80% threshold for what you're reporting for your folks or less, you're going to suffer a 2% reduction, okay? So again, this penalty is enforced for every single Medicare patient for every single Medicare day for an entire year. So we need to really think about that. Some exclusions to the potentially preventable measure are if a patient is discharged from your skilled nursing facility to another skilled nursing facility, an inpatient rehab facility, or a long-term care hospital. So a SNF, an IRF, or an LTAC, they are excluded to the potentially preventable rehospitalization measure. Anybody who expires while they're being covered on Medicare, they're excluded because you're not done with their program yet. They just expired in the middle of the program or at some point before you ended the program. Discharges against medical advice. If your patient went AMA, you didn't have control over them when you had them. You certainly don't have control over them afterwards. And keep in mind, the rehospitalization measure in this program, the quality reporting program, starts at the back door, not on admission. It starts when you discharge the patient. So if you always think in your mind you have a 30-day window when they come in to keep them from rehospitalizing and a 30-day window when they go out, you'll always be on the ball. Okay, you'll always be in compliance as long as you're talking about those 2 points in time. How you fix it is going to be a different story. If your patient went to the hospital for their qualifying stay for cancer treatment or pregnancy, you know how many of those we get in long-term care, then they would be excluded from this measure as well. Okay? So, and again, I don't mean that you have a patient that has a diagnosis of cancer that went into the hospital for a fractured hip. I mean that that stay was for cancer treatment. They'll be excluded. Residents who exhaust their Medicare benefits, and again, because you ran out of days before you completed their program, so you wouldn't, those folks wouldn't count against you either. And then Medicare beneficiaries need to be on the Medicare program for a year before that admission and 3 months after the stay, because it's going to look back for other conditions to risk adjust in the prior 12 months, and they need to stay on for the 3 months afterwards to look for that period for additional components as well as spending. Patients that are transferred to federal hospitals are excluded, and anyone with end-stage renal disease is also excluded from that potentially preventable rehospitalization measure. Some of the most common reasons for admission are that we didn't manage the chronic conditions of the patient very well. Other problems may be that we had inadequate management of infections. Sometimes infection would now become septicemia or some more difficult disease. What did we do about managing that when it was, when the temp started, so to speak? Inadequate management of other unplanned events. It could be something else that happened to the person, and injury prevention, looking at falls and pressure ulcers and other types of things. Again, if a patient has multiple admissions or stays during the 12-month period, all of those stays will count on the quality reporting program. So if you have a bunch of frequent flyers, when you get your QRP reports, they'll show up more than once. So they count in the numbers more than once. So what is considered potentially preventable? These are the conditions that CMS finds the majority of the time that we are sending patients back from skilled nursing facilities into hospitals, okay? So these are the conditions that they would prefer us to treat in-house. So if you're looking at improving your clinical programming and improving your staff competencies, I would be starting in these areas. So I would compare, and I would do a performance improvement study. If I was unhappy with my rehospitalization rates, I would look at and break it down month by month, look at the patients who are rehospitalized, pull that information back, and look at the reasons why those patients went back to the hospital, and were there any patterns or trends. So if I had 13 people go back to the hospital last month and 10 of them went back for respiratory conditions, I would look at my respiratory program and say, what are we doing? What do we need to beef up? What staff competencies do we need to make sure that our staff are adequately identifying when someone's starting to have one of these conditions, and follow up that way. So I would include it as a performance improvement project and take credit for it in my QAPI plan. It is a great QAPI study. It's a great area to improve. We know that it hits at least 3 programs, at least 4 different measures, and we didn't even talk about the third one yet, but we've got FiveStar, QRP, and then value-based purchasing, okay? So when we're looking at respiratory, we look at COPD, asthma, your bacterial or aspirational pneumonia, the flu. Cardiac, again, CHF patients, hypotension, some arrhythmias. Obviously, if your patient's in VTAC, you're going to send them out because many of us can't treat that in a nursing home. Some diabetic complications, if they're in a diabetic coma, it's a little bit too late to treat that. Skin and subcutaneous, looking at pressure ulcers and infections. Septicemia, I will give you that one is a touch and go, okay, and that can escalate very quickly. But what happened when it was just an infection? How did it get to the level of septicemia, okay? GI and GU, you're looking at your UTIs, that's a big no-no. C. diff, dehydration, things that we can treat in-house. Gastro, kidney failure, electrolyte imbalances, and look at that last one, intestinal impaction. For the love of Pete, who missed the 3-day bowel regime? They were constipated before they became impacted. So again, these are areas I would be focusing on. Exclusions for discharge to the community, you're looking at someone who's discharged to a psych hospital, a hospice facility, or if they're going to be utilizing hospice in the community, they're also excluded. Folks that are discharged to law enforcement, sometimes we get that. Those folks that are AMA, again, you didn't have control over them before. If they get discharged to another skilled nursing facility because you're not discharging them back out into the community, they're going to another SNF to finish out their stay. Acute care stays for cancer treatment, again, same as the previous measure. They went to the hospital during that qualifying stay for cancer, not for another condition. Planned discharges would be excluded, and if they benefit exhaust, those folks would be excluded as well. This is the slide I was telling you about Medicare spending per beneficiary. You can think about these 6 episodes in the green boxes as 6 different patients. This is looking at an episode of care for each one of the different patients. So if you look under line 1, under episode 1, we spent about $3,300. The expected spending that CMS thought we were going to spend is about $4,000. So our ratio of observed spending to expected spending was only 0.825. So we only spent about 82.5% of the money that CMS thought we should. When we moved to the second patient, we overspent here. So we spent $4,890 where CMS thought we should have spent $4,100. So our observed to expected spending ratio is 1.193. So we sort of overspent here. Episode 3, we overspent. Episode 4, we underspent. Episode 5 and 6, we overspent. And our total ratio on the far right-hand side is 6.207, okay? So you're going to take that average ratio and divide it by the number of episodes, which for this case were 6, and their average ratio is 1.035. So they're going to take that ratio from your facility and compare it to nationally observed spending episodes. So how much is the rest of the country spending as an average for their patients? And CMS gives us this number. And that was 53.25. So when they compare the spending ratio of 1.035 and multiply that by the average spending of $5,325, you get 55.09, and you can see that in green, okay? But we're not done with it yet. Now we want to compare that to the national median of Medicare spending post-acute care amounts, which is a different number that's been risk adjusted, and that average spending is $5,700. So when we compare our 5509 to 5,700, we've underspent here. We're at 0.966. Okay. So again, this is a little bit better of an example of how Medicare spending per beneficiary is measured. The other thing is that it's also looking at spending during an associated services period. So this is a caption of an MSPB report, okay? And it's going to look at the number of eligible episodes that you had. It's going to look at your spending during the treatment period, which is your skilled nursing facility inpatient stay. And then the next column, the spending during associated services period, in the middle here, is looking at the 30 days after you discharge the patient. What are they spending to continue to treat that condition that they were admitted for, okay? And I have to tell you, in some parts of the country, the 30-day spending in the associated services period is higher than what you're spending on the inpatient episode. So you're being held accountable. So let's just pretend that you sent the patient to home health, okay? So not only are you being held accountable for the home health agency's rehospitalization rate for your patients, because it's in the 30-day window after you discharge the patient, you're being held accountable for how much they're spending on patients, okay? So I would want to do a little investigation about the home health agencies that I have in my area, because if I have 5 of them to choose from and one of them has a rehospitalization rate of 33%, I can tell you they're going down to the bottom of the list. I realize sometimes your hands are tied because patients have pre-existing relationships with them, but they would be the last one I'd be referring to my patients because that's hurting my numbers and my quality, okay? The other thing is looking at their spending. What are they spending on? So again, this is going to give you a total spending for the episode, which includes your inpatient stay and the 30 days afterwards. It's going to compare you against the nation to look at the average MSPB amount. And if your final MSPB score on the far right-hand column is above 1, you're spending higher than the national average. If it's below 1, you're spending less than the national average, okay? So at some point in time, these reports are likely to come back and bite us from a threshold perspective. Okay, the last program I want to talk about just has one quality measure, so it's a little bit easier to explain, and then we'll open it up for question and answer. And that's the SNP value-based purchasing program, okay? So with VBP, we want to look at performance standards, including an achievement rating, which is can you achieve at least the threshold of the lowest 25% of performers in the performance year, versus an improvement rating. So the improvement rating is looking at your facility data at one point in time against your facility data at another point in time. The achievement rating is looking at your facility data at one point in time against all facilities at another point in time. Okay? So these VBP programs are going to rank facilities as to who's the best and who's the worst. There is one measure in the program, and it is rehospitalization. Okay? Your cost to get into this program is 2% of your Medicare payment. It is withheld right from the beginning. You don't get asked. It's not a question. That's your skin in the game. Okay? Now, CMS is going to send back incentive payments to facilities, to providers, and they have to send back between 50 and 70% of the money that they collect, the 2% that they're collecting from the whole country. They have to give between 50 and 70% of that back. They decided that they would give 60% back in the form of incentive payments, so it's kind of like buying your money back, kind of like a game show. So the measure that's in the program now began in January 1st of 2017, and it affected payments as of last year, and that's the all-cause, all-condition measure. So that's the one with the car accident. Remember I mentioned that when they leave the facility in a car accident? Value-based purchasing is measuring from the front door. This is a 30-day window that starts on admission as opposed to the QRP program that starts at discharge. They will be moving the potentially preventable measure into this. Maybe 2020, but right now we're stuck with the all-cause, all-condition measure. Okay? So when we're looking at this, it's measuring, currently measuring what you did, your facility on the red line in 2016 against your facility on the green line in 2018. So did you improve your rehospitalization rate from 2016 to 2018? If you did, you will get some kind of point on this side of the equation, to 90. If you did worse in 2018 than your facility did in 2016, you get no point, okay? And now, whichever measure is higher, either the improvement rating or the achievement rating, will be your final number, okay? So if you didn't do well against yourself, and we have some folks out in California who had this issue where they really started to look at rehospitalizations back in 2015. So last year they were worried. And I said, don't worry, because not a lot of folks were doing that back then. So you might not have improved against yourself significantly. But when you get to this next measure, when you're looking at the achievement threshold, you're going to do way better than most of the country. So you're going to make up on this side of the equation. So this side, under the achievement side, has a couple more hoops to jump through. So you're still looking at your data in 2018, but now you're comparing against all nursing homes on the red line on the bottom in 2016 against your data, the green line towards the top, in 2018. You're always going to be comparing 2 points in time. And again, this doesn't go away. Next year, you're going to be comparing 2017 to 2019, and then it'll be 2018 to 2020. This isn't going to be going away. Okay, so the hoops that you have to jump through are for the achievement rating. You can see in the blue box, you have to be at least as good as the bottom 25% of performers were in that performance year. So in 2016, the average rehospitalization rate was 19.782. All right? So if you're sitting there right now with a rehospitalization rate for the year 2016 of 22, you already know you're not getting any points on this side because you've got to be at or below 19.782. Okay? And so you're trying to achieve the benchmark. Okay? So look up at the top in red where we have benchmark. So you're trying to get to what the average was of the top 10% of performers for the baseline year, which in this case is 2016. So you can see in parentheses the number 83.721. That's the treat and place rate. So think about this. If I have 100 patients in a bucket and I send 20% of them back to the hospital, I still have 80 patients in my bucket. So that's the treat and place rate, the number of patients that you kept in place and treated in place. That's what they're representing in this number. You want your treat and place rate to get as close to 100% as you can get it. So in this case, to be at the top of the value-based purchasing pile of skilled nursing facilities, you're trying to shoot for a treat and place rate of 83.721 or better. Okay? So, again, you can get up to 100 points on this side of the equation, where on the previous slide, you can only get up to 90 points comparing your facility data against your facility data. Okay? If you're comparing your facility data to all the SNFs in the country, then you can get up to 100 points on that side of the equation. Okay? So, again, the achievement rating is based on the percentage of residents that were not readmitted during the window, your treat and place number. Okay? It's going to compare your ratings against other people in the country. How well did you do in 2018 compared to all nursing homes in 2016? If you did better than the benchmarks, you get 100 points. If you did lower than the achievement threshold, you get no points. And that's called your achievement score or achievement rating. The second one is the improvement score. And again, how well did your facility do in 2018 compared to your data in 2016? If you did worse than 2016, you get no points. If you did better, then you can get up to 90 points depending on how much you improved. All right? So again, when we're looking at this 2016 data on this slide, these will affect your performance scores for fiscal year 2020, meaning this October 1st when PDPM strikes, so will this data. Okay? So when we're looking at the 25th percentile and the achievement threshold, those first two numbers, if you add them together, you get 100%. So those are the bottom 25% of performers. So if you have a treat and place rate that is 80.219 or higher, you will get some kind of points in the achievement threshold. Okay? If you want to beat the best performers, then your rehospitalization rate has got to be 16.279 or lower. And that's their treat and place number, 83.721. Okay? So if you add the top two numbers together or the bottom two numbers together, you're going to get 100. So you have the bottom 25% of performers and then the average of the top 10% at that mean of the best decile. Okay? The data that you're receiving from CMS regarding value-based purchasing is going to come back to you in some reporting mechanisms with facility threshold, but I wanted to talk to you about this supplemental workbook. This is probably one of the most important pieces of data that you're going to get from CMS as far as rehospitalization, because it lets you know where your problem is, okay? So it's going to look at patient characteristics. It's going to give you everything you need to identify the patient, except for the most important thing, which is their name. So you need to look through, and the way that I use this is looking through the SNF index information and look at who I admitted that day if I'm a slower building. If I'm a really busy building and I do 10 or 12 admissions a day, I usually spread out my discharges. So I might look at admission and discharge to see who came in on this day but was discharged on this day. And then I'd be looking, this is the prior proximal hospitalization in the very far columns. And then this spreadsheet, when you open it up, is very, very wide because it has multiple columns for DRGs or diagnostic-related groups, meaning the diagnosis the person came back into the hospital for. And when it looks at the rehospitalization information, you're looking for one column that says an unplanned discharge. So if in the rehospitalization information under the unplanned discharge column, there's a number 1. Those are the patients you need to focus on, not anybody else from the list. Take the ones that had an unplanned readmission, go back to the SNF index information, look at when they were admitted and mostly when they were discharged, and then the discharge status code. If I discharged a patient on May 1st and they were admitted to the hospital on May 1st, more than likely I sent the patient to the hospital. If I discharge the patient on May 1st and they get into the hospital on May 7th, it's more than likely they went to the hospital after I discharged them home. The way you fix your rehospitalization problem is different depending on whether the problem is under your roof, you're sending the patient out, or post-discharge. Okay? So how you manage and control that rehospitalization, you need to split out where your problem is. So if you're looking at your staff always sending patients out to the hospital that don't need to go, you're going to fix that through staff competencies and monitoring and holding them accountable, maybe involving some of your medical staff, other items. Then if your problem is past your back door, you may need to keep in touch with those people or to educate your downstream provider to say they can get readmitted back to me within 30 days. They don't need to go back to the hospital. Okay, so the way you fix this can be completely different from a quality assurance perspective. This last piece of information is the facility level data. What you're paying attention to here is this is from last year's information that was released to you from CMS. Down the bottom is your incentive multiplier. That gets multiplied by the Medicare rate. So for this facility that I'm showing you here, they're getting less than the Medicare rate. So they pay the 2% into the program, and they're getting less than 1% of that data back. So they're only multiplying their Medicare rates by this multiplier, incentive multiplier that's here. So if your incentive multiplier is above 1, you're getting back some revenue into the system, okay? You can get back the 2% that you put in, or sometimes even more if your rehospitalization rates are among some of those that are the best in the country. So again, you can see the achievement thresholds here and the benchmarks for previous years. You can see the facility's achievement score, them against the rest of the country, and their improvement score. This facility did not improve from the performance year to the baseline year. So for purposes of our presentation today, this facility did worse in 2017 and 2015 last year, but let's say we're looking at this year, they did worse in 2018 than they did in 2016, so they didn't get any points against themselves, but they got points when they compared against the rest of the country. Okay? And again, these are the provider reports that come out that rank facilities across the country as to who's the best and who's the worst. And again, it will only be a matter of time before ACOs, preferred providers, other networks, bundlers are taking a look at this to determine who they think are valuable players. So next steps, again, to monitor for readmissions, like we had mentioned, look for trends, look for patterns. Can I use this information to help me in any other ways? And to be aware of your rankings and watch that stuff on a regular basis. And as we move into PDPM, we have to give our patients enough care and services that they can stay out in the community and healthy for the next 30 days while maintaining good outcomes for those folks, okay? So we have to keep a real tight management system around how we manage that. So keeping rehab costs down but achieving good outcomes. You might utilize some restorative nursing. You might utilize some group or concurrent therapy. You might utilize group or concurrent for your managed people now. So when your PEPA reports come out, you might be reporting some managed care folks that you're using that for that don't have any limitations on how you provide therapy under some of those contracts. And again, looking at cost containment under the MSPB component here. Okay. So I'd like to open it up. I'll pass it back to you, Lori, to open it up for questions for any of the participants that we have.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Crystal, do we have any questions?
We do have a couple questions in chat. So this first question from Andrea Plu, and this was during the managed care part of the presentation.
Yep.
She said 80% of MDSs submitted has to be completely completed. I thought it was one area that you are focusing on to improve, at least one goal.
What I'm talking about with that component is looking at the QRP data that's used to determine your quality ratings. So this is not just section GG, this is all of the quality reporting. So when you're looking at pressure ulcers, falls with major injury, those other components, we're looking at all of that and making sure the MDSs have that information, because if you start to drop that information off of the MDSs and that starts to get to be 80% of the data that you reported, that you're missing at least 20% of that data, that's where you end up with the slap on the hand with the reduction of the 2% payment. So yes, you only need to choose one goal in section GG, But you need to also consider if you don't meet that goal when the patient's discharged, now the percentage of goals that you met is 0.
Okay. The next question is, can you confirm the number of days that the percent of residents who experience one or more falls can stay on your MDS look-back? Was it up to 369 days?
Yes, that's correct, because the look-back period goes back up to 275 days. So depending on how you scheduled your MDS dates, when you add it all up together, it adds up to a little bit over a year that they can go back when they do the look-back scans for the falls with major injuries. That's how long, because some of them have looking back at falls in the previous on the previous MDSs as well, because they're scanning back a certain period of time, and they're looking for any falls on any MDS. So yes, that's one of the longest quality measures that stays on the report. It stays on the longest.
Okay. And where do they go to find the provider reports and also the supplemental workbook that you were referring to?
Perfect. They can go under their CASPR reporting. They click into CASPR. They go into their reports. They would be going under value-based purchasing. I'm sorry, that was QRP. For QRP, they're going to go under the SNP QRP tab under the reports. For the value-based purchasing reports, they show up in your facility inbox. So you're going under the folders tab. You're going into your facility inbox, and you're clicking into the inboxes. And if you don't see it in one, just click into all your facility inboxes that come up under that tab. And there may be multiple reports in there by now. I would go in and pull everything off if you've never done this before. And again, when you open that supplemental workbook, if your facility does allowed admissions and discharges, it takes a long time. And you're going to want to look at that on the computer unless you have an IT person that knows how to print this, because it ends up being very, very, very tiny when you go to print it.
Okay, and I do not see any other questions in chat.
And I think we are past our time, so we're going to have to conclude. I just want to thank Maureen very much for your wonderful insights and presentation. I'm already getting emails saying, great job. We do appreciate and value everyone's time in joining. The webinar evaluation will come up as you disconnect. Don't forget to get your nursing home administrators, CEs, or less if you need an attendance participation certificate, you could use that one as well. Maureen will be back with us on April 16th, and she's going to talk about ICD-10 coding for the patient that's a mouthful, PDPM system. So it'll be the same time, 1 to 2:30 Central Time, and she'll be back next month to talk to us again.
Thank you. I was just going to say thank you so much, Lori, and thank you to Great Plains Quality Innovation Network, as well as the other twins that have also joined. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. And I'll be visiting with you later, Marie.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect. Speakers, please